Hello and welcome to another Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we're talking to Andy Robinson of boutique rights management company Interstellar Music Services. Now, in the modern music business paradigm, managers can do everything. So we're going to be discussing how you can build a team and not be everything, while still providing the best service possible to your artists. Each Music Ally Focus podcast episode, like this one, analyzes one meaningful music business story at a time. So this podcast is going to be quick. It should take about the same amount of time as Patrick Bertoletti could hypothetically eat 80 slices of pizza. Patrick ate 39 slices of pizza in 12 minutes in 2012, remarkably only taking second place in Canada's biggest pizza eating contest. Now, talking of biting off more than you can chew, it's possible for the modern music manager to look after every single element of an artist's career. So how do you choose what to do and what not to do? Because if you try and do everything, that's the fast route to burnout. Andy has a background in artist management and now focuses on helping artists recover as much of their money as possible from their music via a data-centric approach. And he took this specific path after he realized that it was his strength. So we wanted to ask Andy one of those slippery questions that all managers must now ask themselves. With an infinite number of ways to connect with the music industry, how do you focus on the things that will work well for you and for your artists? And perhaps most importantly, how you choose what not to do. Let's go over to Andy right now. And so I'm very happy to welcome Andy Robinson, all the way from Barcelona, of Interstellar Music Services. Hi, Andy.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
We want to talk here about modern management, decision-making as a modern manager, and the sort of complicated thing that managers are now facing more than ever, which is when managers can do everything, how do they choose not to do everything and to focus on certain things? But first of all, can you just give us a quick introduction, who you are, what your background is, and what you do?
Yep, very happy to. My name is Andy Robinson. I run Interstellar Music Services. Previously, I ran Interstellar Management, and then I set up a label and a publishing company. So my background basically is sort of being exactly, I guess what we're probably going to talk about today is a manager working with a variety of artists and sort of essentially doing all the bits that were required. So the label basically was born out of, the artists I was working with needing a home for their recordings, and the publishing company the same. I met a guy called Alan Jacobs, who was a bit of a mentor to me and sort of really taught me the basics of sort of rights management. And I sort of built around the requirements of the artists I was working with, and we've ended up here.
Well, let's talk about the modern understanding of the manager's role. Sort of leaning on your experience, how has the role of the manager changed in the last few years and why? And what has those changes meant for people working as managers?
Yeah, well, I think, the obvious sort of traditional role of a manager has always been about being sort of sitting in between all the component parts. So the manager would be in between the artist and the label, and the artist and the publisher and the agent and what have you. And the idea was really that they sort of just fought on behalf of the artist to get what was needed. You always think of sort of Peter Grant characters with, hanging people out of windows and what have you.
Yeah, have you broken anyone's legs in the course of a negotiation?
No,
now's the time to admit it.
It's not really my style. Okay. I'm pleased to say, but I've thought about it, but I've never done it.
Okay.
I think the modern world, we've obviously music creation has been democratized. We've ended up in a situation where, as we know and is endlessly touted, there's, a lot of records, let's just put it that way, released every single day. And there's also a lot of solutions, whether they be technical or just the evolution of sort of distribution since the digital age, which has meant that, people can get their music out there. There was a lot less shelf space in the past. And what that means is that from a manager's point of view, you generally have to do a lot more stuff. You have to be on top of it. It's all very well working with a DIY distributor or, DIY publisher or whatever, but you actually have to manage that, the aspects of that. It's you ingesting, it's you using the portal, it's you sort of learning about those things. On top of that, you've got this sort of almost constant stream of new channels for music marketing, whether that be sort of TikTok or be NFTs or whatever. So you've sort of got to be on top of the past, the future, and the present. And I think, that is a lot of tiny component parts that add up to be a huge job. And it's very difficult to honestly be on top of that, or certainly to be on top of that for a sort of sustainable, large amount of time.
I mean, management is famously a very involved job that takes a lot of time and energy and connections to various different parts of the industry. So in the last couple of years, we've really seen the sort of blossoming of platforms that really enable sort of 100% do-it-yourself approach, distribution, everything. Has that meant that the manager's job has got bigger, or is it just many more facets to it?
I didn't work in the golden era of the 1970s and 80s when all the money was flowing through the music industry, really? And we're only, lots of flowers on credit cards and what have you. But I think it's easy to sort of look at it and think that now it's much bigger and more involved. I think the truth of the matter is that there's always probably been a lot to do. It's just that exactly what needs to be done has changed. And I think, as you just mentioned there, now sort of anyone can basically get some recorded music that they've created on their phone or wherever else, up into the world. How do you cut through the noise? So it's actually a question of, for me, that the definition of success with all the artists I've ever worked with has always been around this idea of a sustainable business where you create something and then you can wake up in the morning and you can continue to create the thing, the art that you're making. And I think, the way that you do that and the logistics involved has evolved and changed. And there are, probably more responsibilities on the individual managers to be able to get an artist through that noise to a level of, a certain level where, we all know that some of the larger music organizations, the A&R process has become very much based on data, very much based on sort of metrics and seeing what's going on. And I think, in order to cut through that noise and get a publishing deal or a label to sign you, you've already got to have created quite a significant amount of success on your own. Personally, I kind of feel that if you've created that level of success on your own, why do you then need to necessarily sort of sell your rights? In fact, that's kind of the genesis of my new company, is this idea of like, well, why do people have to sell their music rights in order to have them looked after properly? It is the game as a manager to build up your profile of your artist and get some success, and then at that point sort of sell the creations. Personally, I don't think that's in every case the requirement.
One of the things that's developed in parallel to all these technological developments is a sort of an equivalent understanding. Artists now are entering, it seems, maybe not entering as an emerging artist, but they very quickly understand the realities of the business and how it works, and also how it used to work and what the alternatives are in terms of doing it yourself and maintaining something that is increasingly desirable, which is a direct-to-fan relationship where there's no intermediaries and the artist team can connect with all those super fans and use platforms of, maximize that in a business sense, which is good for everybody involved. You must speak to a lot of managers about this. First of all, what kind of desire is there for that? Does just what you just mentioned of staying independent and building the ecosystem and the structure themselves, and how are managers responding to that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we do talk to a lot of managers, and interestingly, the response that we get from the majority, honestly, I would say, is fairly similar, which is that basically they are doing the best they can. Most of the people that we're talking to have created a level of success already, and what's happening sort of from the analysis that we've done, both in terms of the conversations that we're having with them, but also the data work that we've done in the background on the reason that we're speaking to them in the first place, is that actually there's quite a lot of money left on the table. So you could be doing very well in terms of, getting your artist to be blowing up on TikTok or getting your monthly listeners on Spotify up and all these different sort of metrics that are important. But what we found is that, in a lot of cases, like up to 40% of the revenues that are generated by that traction aren't being claimed because, and I know it's incredibly boring and we're all sick of talking about metadata, but because things aren't registered correctly and we're not claiming it, there's sort of money there. And that sort of goes back to my answer a second ago about a sustainable business model. Is that one thing is about creating hype and about making sure that you cut through the noise, but the other thing is that how do you enable your artists to continue to do that regularly? And in my view, the answer to that is you make sure that you're capturing all the revenues that have already been created by the work that you've already done, and then you use that as your sort of leverage into future projects. And in that way, you're not then reliant on someone coming along and saving the day with a huge advance or whatever the situation may be.
Where's the most common place that you find these revenues left in the dusty corners? What is there something which is very common, or is it different for every artist?
I think there's definitely some variety, but I mean, it has to be said that on the publishing side, there's we found people with 100 million streams, no publishing registration, like ridiculous numbers that you can't believe. So there's that. There's the neighbouring rights. There's errors that have happened. But yes, certainly I think that there is the modern artist and the modern artist manager has a focus, understandably, on sort of marketing and the label, the distribution side, and getting the records up there, and is not necessarily capturing all of the other revenues from the other rights that are already there. They've already earned the money. That's the point. And so I think that's quite interesting. And I think it's reflection on the fact that you can be on top of lots of stuff, but it is almost impossible to be on top of everything. And if you think that you're on top of everything, then either well done or have some reflection on basically like where the ball might be being dropped.
Let's talk practicalities then on that part, which is like a lot of things in the modern era. The temptation is to do everything, to be on it. Artists might want to be on every social media platform, or you might, as a manager, say, right, we're going to do everything ourselves. We're going to bring everything in house, and that sounds like a lot of work immediately. And it's the fast route to burnout as well. One of the really complicated parts is then, okay, just as everything comes in-house in terms of the possibilities, the decision-making comes home to roost as well, and you really have to make solid decisions, right? How should a manager go about that? Saying, okay, here's 1,000 options, and I'm going to focus just on these 5 for now. How do you go about it, in your experience? Have you gone about making those decisions, and what do you base those decisions on? So
it's about not necessarily doing everything yourself, but leaning into the bits that that you're very good at. I mean, a lot of managers these days are very good at marketing, and that's part of the sort of label operation traditionally that they're sort of taken on of, again, cutting through the noise. But then, in terms of the rights management side of stuff, obviously that's something that I'm particularly focused on. For me, what I realized was that probably I'm the opposite. I was not great at the marketing side of stuff, but in terms of the forensic rights management was something that I actually sort of could lean into. I mean, just as a sort of a little story, one thing that I found, and I mean, any managers listening, I highly recommend that you try this, is just if you've got oversight of your publishing and your recorded statements, analyze them, like actually check one side against the other, because, in every single artist that I've ever worked with, I've found money just basically, missing, lost, and then claimed it just simply by checking one side against the other. And it's those little things that enable you to then pay for a radio plugger or a social media person to help with the marketing stuff. So anyway, going back to your question, I think the key is to work backwards from what your ambition is and then have realistic expectations about how you can do that. And I think, a lot of especially young managers are feeling that they can't admit that they don't know how to do something. And right. So they're just pretending that it's all fine. And that's a mistake,
And so what about those conversations then for any sort of emerging or younger managers and artists who are listening and perhaps haven't had this conversation? What sort of questions do you need to ask about if you're saying, okay, we're going to bring stuff in-house, or maybe even actually for more advanced artists a bit further up the ladder, we're going to bring some of these things in-house. We're going to keep it DIY. It means we get all these advantages of money and whatever. But we need to set our ambitions to make sure that we're able to focus and get the most out of it. I mean, that sounds like a complicated conversation, right? How do you go about doing that in a way that is constructive?
And let me give you just one sort of example, maybe, is that, quite a lot of the managers that I talk to, and we talk about the publishing side of things, and they've got, essentially what's happening is that if their track came out, let's say, for example, obviously it varies on territory and different revenue streams, but, they've had a song out, it's been doing very, very well, came out 2 years ago, and they never registered the publishing because they're waiting for a traditional publishing company to come along and once they've got a certain level, they're going to offer them a massive publishing deal. They're going to take that. And so in the meantime, they're not claiming that money. That money is just frittering away because after a certain point, it can't be back claimed, And so those little things about being aware of that is key. So, do you know the best way of creating a TikTok campaign? Maybe, is that as important as making sure that all the revenues that you've already generated are being claimed? I would argue probably not. I think that both are important, but in terms of creating a sustainable business, the key probably is to make sure that whatever activity you're doing in order to create traction, that you're then capturing the value of that on the back end. So in terms of like priorities, for me, that's a huge priority.
As you say, the temptation is sometimes to say, I'll just take that. I'll do it. I can do it as well. I can learn and do it. And of course, that is the incremental way to get to burnout, right? Whether it's the manager doing too much or then the artist as a consequence of the manager and the artist saying, hey, let's do everything. Then the artist is stretched. And how do you find that managers now are treating that side of things, especially when things are coming in-house, mental health, protecting everybody's sort of limited mental resources?
Part of doing everything is understanding what other options are there and then making educated decisions as to the right ones. And I think, the traditional music industry has been very much based on this concept of, okay, now you hand over control of that to me. I'll give you some money or a contract or whatever it might be, some resources, and we'll do that now. And now, that doesn't exist in the same way as it does. And so obviously, as you say, that puts a lot of pressure onto both the artists and the teams to deliver to those expectations of the other people involved, and to try to sort of cut through the noise. I think, and I hope that my artists that I've worked with over the years would agree with me here and sort of acknowledge this. My view is very much that it's very easy to look to the future and think of all the things that you could have been doing or how other people are doing well. But the important thing is to really focus on like what your objectives were and are and how you're doing and whether or not people resonate with the music that you're making, most importantly, how you can continue to make more of that art. And that is fundamental with both a mental health consideration, but also in a sustainable business, as we talked about earlier on. But I think for me, the key is appreciating the wins that you have got. I see so many people sort of hitting a target and then immediately moving that target higher and not being satisfied with the achievements that they've had, both on the creative and on the business side. And I think, a key thing is to really sort of, it's a cliche to say enjoy the journey, but I think it's important to sort of make sure that you take the time to appreciate the wins that you've got as a team, what you've managed to achieve, and also be realistic about the fact that it is impossible to do everything perfectly. You're not going to. No one is. Even with all the resources in the world, people make big mistakes. So you've got to cut yourself some slack, and you've got to bring the focus back to being about why are we doing this? What is important to us? What are we trying to achieve? And honestly, if what you're trying to achieve is fame or money or whatever, there's other ways other than art and music to do that much faster and more efficiently.
Let's look forward a bit. The manager role has changed in the last few years, but what would that role be like, perhaps as you are planning, for sort of 5 to 10 years' time? Is there anything that's sort of a minor thing now, or that is outsourced regularly now, that you foresee coming in-house? Do you foresee management becoming more DIY and sort of management becoming the start and end point of a lot of the business? What do you see coming?
Firstly, I wish that I knew what was coming in 5 to 10 years' time, because as we all do. But I think the important thing, and probably this relates back to almost like the first question that you asked me, is this idea of what is a manager's role, and where is that going? And honestly, I kind of think that we're already moving in the direction of travel, and probably going to accelerate more towards this sort of partnership rather than the sort of traditional, it's a percentage deal or whatever, or it's about as more responsibility for success and running the business goes on to the manager, rather than them overseeing other businesses taking care of those component parts. That probably the direction of travel in terms of the artist and manager relationship is going to be much more about partnerships and about how all the elements are sort of put together. Honestly, I can completely easily envisage a scenario where instead of there being a manager doing everything, we get back into there being more of a breakdown of like, this person is responsible for this and this person is responsible for that element and what have you, but in a different way than it used to be, in the traditional music industry. I mean, we all hope that songwriters get a better split of the revenues. I think that is unsustainable as it currently is. There's a lot of sort of talk about it, but that I think will make a big difference. Right. And, finally, I think, we've got, without touching on the huge subject of AI and what have you, and how that, too much, how that fits in. My personal view is that, music that is made by humans and that resonates with other humans is art, and that doesn't mean that art can't be created by other ways, but we need to safeguard that art and that representation and that craftsmanship, and be careful that we don't, in the pursuit of efficiency, speed, and what have you, that we disregard that and think of that as old, because I think there is a real value to mistakes made by humans that are captured and turned into products.
That's a very interesting point about AI. But the one thing it really seems to be good at, and this is, I imagine, a good thing for managers who need to bring things in-house, is that it can quite easily replicate jobs or frameworks of jobs that perhaps would have taken a lot of time for a person to do before. So, it's you can ask ChatGPT to draw up a management contract. I would not recommend anyone do that, but you can draw up small agreements as a framework, and then the manager, for instance, could check it, insert the right things that they want. But it can there might be a way in the future of using AI as that kind of tool that would expedite the kind of tasks that now take time and other resources, and the manager has more control because it's not wasted time on repetitive tasks.
Well, look, a lot of what I've sort of talked about so far in this chat has been about this idea of money being left on the table, or as my business partner says, money left on the floor. And about how it needs fixing, and obviously, I'm sure nearly every podcast that you record has someone talking about the value of metadata, and we've all watched too many panels at conferences about it all. But imagine a world where the global rights database does just get fixed by ChatGPT. That's or
created.
Well, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly
Skynet right. Launched.
We should hope that if in 5 years' time we're still talking about the fact that metadata needs to be inputted correctly at source, and how do we tidy up massive catalogs, then, really, like, it would be great if we could move back onto the human connection and resonance and art conversation. And that's personally my hope.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that. And as a final little contextual nugget from you, Andy, what is your favorite piece of music? If you could only select one song, or I'll give you an album if you really want, that you could listen to for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, such a difficult question. And I knew you were going to ask this because you always ask it. Yeah. My initial reaction was I was going to try and switch it back on you and ask you, because I'm not sure that anyone. No,
the switcheroo is strictly not allowed.
I knew you'd do that. So I knew you'd say that. So I'm just gonna say the last record that I literally listened to this morning, which is subject to change, which would be the first Santana album.
Really? Okay, you're the first person to suggest that. So and I should be really building up a giant playlist of all these, but I'm not.
Yes, you should. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. What do you like about it? What's the attraction?
Well, it's the percussion on Soul Sacrifice is the thing that really won me over this morning. I live in Barcelona now, and I had my records all shipped over recently, so they've been in storage for years and years. So I'm sort of like a kid in a candy shop listening to the
process of rediscovery.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Exactly. It's wonderful.
Okay, great. Well, I will put a link to that beneath the podcast. And I'll put a link, of course, to Interstellar Music Services and something to you as well. And people can check out what you're doing. But Andy Robinson, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
All right, that's it. Big thanks to Andy again. And if you found that useful, please share this podcast on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. If you'd like to get in touch with me, it'd be great to hear from you. It's joe@musically.com. That's JOE@musically.com. We also have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces of the best analysis, news, marketing insight and skills from Music Ally. So you can sign up via the link that is below this podcast. And if that seems like too much of a commitment for you at the moment, if you hop over to Music Ally on LinkedIn, there is a way of subscribing to a version of the newsletter via LinkedIn as well. All right, that's it. Thanks very much for joining us here on Music Ally Focus. I've been Joe Sparrow. You've been our wonderful audience, and see you next time.